Africa, the second largest continent, covering about 1/5 of the total land surface of Earth. The continent is bounded on the west by the Atlantic Ocean, on the north by the Mediterranean Sea, on the east by the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean, and on the south by the mingling waters of the Atlantic and Indian Ocean. Throughout history, Black Africans have been historically viewed as a threat by non-Black individuals. This perception can be attributed to a combination of factors supported by various historical accounts and sources. Negative perceptions and representations such as civil wars, hunger, corruption, greed, selfishness, diseases, poverty, and the like have been the defining characters of Africa and the Africans in the minds of many Western people. During the 19th century, European imperialists named Africa the Dark Continent, confident that no complex civilizations had ever existed there. When colonial archaeologists found evidence to the contrary, they were dismissive of their finds. To this day, in the West, students of the ancient world have often never heard of the ancient African civilizations of Kush, Nuq, and Axum, although all three were contemporaneous with the rise of Greco-Roman culture. So what are the main reasons why Black Africans have historically been considered a threat to society? There was a prevalent fear among non-Black individuals that intermarriage with Black Africans would lead to the genetic annihilation of their own race. This belief perpetuated the notion that Black genes were dominant and posed a threat to the genetic heritage of non-Black population. The history of slavery and colonization further contributed to the perception of Black Africans as a threat. European colonizers created systems that excluded Black Africans from positions of power and relegated them to inferior roles, emphasizing physical labor over more sophisticated jobs. Philosophers like Aristotle also propagated the idea that slaves, many of whom were Black, were meant to be subjugated, leading to brutal punishments and dehumanization. Black Africans were known for their physical strength and charisma, which instilled fear and insecurity among non-Black populations. This perception of physical dominance led to concerns that Black Africans would eventually overpower non-Blacks if given equal opportunities and rights. It is worth noting that Black Africans have made huge contributions in areas such as medicine, mathematics, religion, spirituality, architecture, and language. Even after all this, people considered Africans dangerous and threatening. Western media also support this preconceived notion. Black Africans were systematically denied access to education, both during slavery and after its abolition. This denial aimed to perpetuate the perception of intellectual inferiority and limit the potential of Black individuals. Substandard schools with inadequate resources were established, reinforcing negative stereotypes and hindering progress. But what perhaps continued to be the most pronounced impact of slavery on contemporary Africa is racism and skewed value judgments that created class, social status, and respect based on color. As slavery ended in other areas, slave traders found new frontiers in Africa, with the trade still being practiced in the 19th century. With Africa having been the last to carry the tag and prejudice associated with slaves who are treated as second-class citizens, the color hierarchies have persisted to modern society. Racism includes all the laws, policies, ideologies, and barriers that prevent people from experiencing justice, dignity, and equity because of their racial identity. It can come in the form of harassment, abuse, or humiliation, violence, or intimidating behavior. Non-Black individuals continue to perpetuate systemic racism and discrimination against Black Africans, both within Africa and abroad. This includes unequal access to education, healthcare, employment, and political power. The lack of representation in various aspects of society further reinforces the perception of Black Africans as inferior and threatens their sense of self-worth. Public attitudes to race have certainly changed, and surveys have measured this evolution over many decades. Today, people in the majority group make far fewer overt hostile actions towards minority. When racist acts do occur, they are widely condemned rather than being condoned as they were in the past. These positive changes are due to a widespread disapproval of racist activities in society. It is no longer socially acceptable to express racism directly. The lack of tolerance for racist behavior makes navigating one's way through daily life, for visible minorities, less hazardous than it once was. Unfortunately, the impact of negative images and stereotypes we have inherited from the past is more difficult to eradicate, and from the past is more difficult to eradicate. A lack of tolerance of hostile behaviors is not necessarily the same as genuine equality of opportunity. A reduction of racist acts does not automatically mean Black people will feel they are being fairly treated in the workplace. Negative stereotypes perpetuated through the media and education systems have reinforced the fear of Black people. Non-Black individuals skillfully use their language and culture to portray Black Africans as inferior, which has persisted throughout history and still exists today. People's ability to enjoy key human rights is being dramatically curtailed by racial bias in decision-making. That is grounded in false beliefs, said Ahmed Reed, who chairs the working group of experts on people of African descent. This bias has such a systemic impact that people face similar challenges in different countries. The abundant natural resources found in Africa have long fueled envy and desire among non-Black individuals. European colonizers exploited Africa, considering Africans as less intelligent and justifying their colonization as bringing civilization to the continent. Today, multinational corporations and foreign powers continue to exploit Africa's resources, often without benefiting local communities. The negative portrayal of Africa in Western media further reinforces the sense of threat and animosity towards Black Africans, animosity towards Black African. The fear of Black Africans stems from various factors. One aspect is their physical superiority, as Black people have been known for their strength and charisma throughout history. Non-Blacks felt that they would be dominated if Black Africans were allowed to participate fully. This fear led to the exclusion of Black people from positions of power and the establishment of a system that devalued physical labor. Black Africans have a long history of prosperity and wealth, living in magnificent cities adorned with gold, which evoke envy from other civilizations. This superiority complex led non-Black individuals with inferiority complexes to perceive Black Africans as a threat. Factors such as physical strength, genetic potential, historical contributions, and intellectual achievements have contributed to this fear. One cardinal fact of our time is the momentous impact of Africa's awakening upon the modern world. The flowing tide of African nationalism sweeps everything before it and constitutes a challenge to the colonial powers to make a just restitution for the years of injustice and crime committed against our continent. For years, Africa has been the footstool of colonialism and imperialism, exploitation and degradation. More than 400 years since over 12 million men and women were forcibly removed from their native land in Africa along treacherous routes and delivered as slaves in Americas and Europe. The impact of that historic forced migration continues to shape the continent and redefine the socio-cultural, economic, and political development of the African people. Researchers posit that slave raiding in Africa, which ultimately weakened the social and fabric of the continent, giving rise to colonialism, altered not just Africa, but the New World Order and how the world relate to each other to date. Robbing African countries off the much-needed labor force by taking men and women at their prime and productive age not only affected the economic activities then, but has been attributed to the poverty experienced in the continent over the years. Researchers like Nunn have pointed to the correlation between countries where a majority of slaves were taken and rise in poverty over the years. They indicate that if slavery never took place, the 72% gap in average income between Africa and the rest of the world would not be experienced today. If anything, they argue Africa would be at par in development with Asia or Latin America. Despite the encouraging economic development enjoyed by many African countries during the last decade, many of them are still characterized by widespread poverty and inequality. Health and education outcomes are among the lowest in the world, and the continent's population has insufficient access to sanitation and safe drinking water. We should help those who are weaker. So how can we help Africa now? There are 4 ways you can help people in Africa. Volunteering. The most effective way to help people in Africa is by getting directly involved in the root of problems and helping to solve them one step at a time. Volunteering offers a great opportunity to do exactly this. To get started, visit a website like Projects Abroad and find out what opportunities exist and how you can get involved. You can visit countries like Ghana, Kenya, Ethiopia, etc., and get a taste of what it's like to work in orphanages, old age homes, shelter homes, and schools. Nothing beats interacting with people in person and seeing firsthand the difference your efforts can make to improve someone's life. Donate money to charities and NGOs. Not everyone has the time or opportunity to volunteer personally, but there are other ways you can support the charities working on the ground in Africa. Another way you can get involved is by donating money to local working charities and NGOs. There are many working bodies in Africa helping the poor and the needy, provide food and water. The two basic things most African countries lack is healthy food and pure water. 80 of illnesses can be traced back to a lack of drinkable water and malnutrition. According to a survey, nearly 319 million people in sub-Saharan Africa don't have access to safe drinking water. You can help these people by donating to projects that install filtration plants throughout these countries or taking part in clean water programs. The Water Project is an organization that raises funds to drive clean water campaigns. You can also take part in the World Food Program, which has helped over 100 million people in 80 different countries in Africa. Help improve the quality of education. No country can ever truly progress without access to a high standard of education. And when it comes to African nations, the quality of education is often poor. There are no proper classrooms for students to sit in, no competent professors to teach the students, and no counselors to guide the students. If you want to contribute positively to the future of an African country and make a direct difference to the lives of poor children and their families, you can help build schools that fulfill basic requirements, or you can counsel the students on how to build a better future for themselves. Can Africa rise again? Africa has an opportunity to ride the wave of recent political reform and leadership shifts to boost economic growth, but questions remain as to whether the continent can achieve the necessary diversification of its economies and capitalize on the adoption of new technologies offered by the fourth industrial revolution to catch up with the rest of the world. What is Africa's future? Projections show that by 2050, Africa's population will double. By 2100, 1 in 3 people on Earth will be African. This means that by the end of the century, sub-Saharan Africa, which already has an extraordinarily young population, will be home to almost half of the young people in the world. Finally, we must understand that perception of Black Africans as a threat is deeply ingrained in history and continues to persist today. By understanding the historical context and dismantling these prejudices, we can foster a society that embraces diversity and recognizes the invaluable contributions of Black individuals. It is time to break down barriers, promote understanding, and create a more just and equitable world for all.